Wind worried at the boards beneath her bare feet, slipping through the cracks like a thief, curling the dust around her toes. She stood small against the emptiness, the ragged hem of her shift slapping her shins, a frayed wool blanket clutched to her shoulders, as if it could keep the cold from gnawing at her bones. Her hair was a tangled snarl the color of dry hay, and her cheeks were drawn, hollows too deep for someone so young. The freight platform groaned in the wind, half collapsed and splintering under the sun's long glare. Across the street, the stagecoach drew its last shuddering breath, the team steaming in the chill. The driver jumped down, boots striking the dirt with a puff of pale dust, and swung open the door. Out stepped a woman, not hurried, not hesitant, but moving as though each inch of ground had to be considered before her foot could claim it. Her carpetbag was worn smooth, where countless fingers had gripped it before her, the cheap lace at her cuffs unraveling into frail threads that fluttered in the breeze. A bonnet shaded her face, but the line of her mouth was enough to tell the rest. This was a woman who had learned to stand still under the weight of watching eyes. And there were eyes. A line of townsfolk leaned against the hitch rails, spilling from the saloon doorway, from the mercantile porch. The air was thick with the scrape of low laughter, the clink of coins changing hands. They'd been wagering, some openly, some with glances and muttered numbers, whether anyone would meet the mail-order bride's arrival. No one had stepped forward. The girl moved before she could think herself out of it. She crossed the strip of dirt, the wind lifting the edges of her blanket, her bare feet silent against the grit. She stopped in front of the woman and tilted her face upward. Her eyes were older than they should be, a color worn pale by too much sun and too little kindness. "You look lonely," she said, her voice catching once before settling into something steady. "I'm tired of crying hungry." The woman's gaze lowered, not sharp, not startled, more like she was trying to decide if the words were real. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Instead, her eyes drifted past the girl to the men along the hitching rail, where few still smirked, leaning on their own humor like a crutch. The men had the look of folks who expected no one to rise above the dirt they walked on. The street was a scatter of rough edges, saloon doors swinging crooked on their hinges, warped signs creaking on rusty nails, wind chimes made from flattened tin plates singing sharp notes when the gusts passed through. Somewhere nearby, a hammer struck metal in an irregular rhythm, and a dog barked without conviction. The barkeep was pouring whiskey before the morning sun had climbed high enough to burn off the frost, the amber stream catching a flash of light. A seamstress, framed in the window of the dress shop, paused with her needle mid-stitch, squinting toward the new arrival. Her smirk was thin, almost mean, as if she'd known all along that no one would be waiting at the coach. The woman adjusted her grip on the carpetbag, the leather handle worn soft. The girl noticed the way her knuckles whitened. Farther down, at the edge where shadow met the dust, a man leaned against the hitching post. His coat collar was turned high against the wind, the brim of his hat shading his eyes. A rifle rested in the saddle scabbard beside him. He wasn't part of the jeering, nor the silence. He simply watched, unmoving, as though he had no stake in what unfolded yet. The girl could feel the emptiness in the space between herself and the woman, the pause stretching thin. She thought maybe she'd spoken wrong, that maybe she shouldn't have said anything at all. But she didn't take the words back. She stood there, the wind tugging at her hair, the smell of dry dirt and horse sweat, and with smoke all tangled together. The woman shifted her weight, and for the first time, her eyes returned to the girl's face. They weren't the eyes of someone who pitied her. They were the eyes of someone who recognized the thing they'd carried themselves. Slowly, she lowered to one knee, the skirt of her dress folding into the dust. She lifted a hand, hesitant at first, and brushed back the tangle of hair that had blown across the girl's forehead. The touch revealed a faint yellowing bruise at her temple, the shape of it hidden until now. The woman's thumb lingered at the edge of the bruise, not pressing, just acknowledging it. Behind them, the street noises softened, as though the wind itself had decided to wait and see. Down by the hitching post, the man's head tipped slightly, the shadow across his face breaking enough to catch a glint in his eyes. It wasn't surprise. It was something more deliberate, something that marked the instant a thought became a decision. The woman let her hand drop, not because she wanted to, but because she had nothing to give beyond that. The girl's stomach growled loud enough to bridge the silence between them. From somewhere down the street, Laughter rose again, thin and distant. The saloon's piano stumbled over a few notes before stopping. The woman stood, the dust clinging to the hem of her skirt. She looked toward the livery, then toward the empty road beyond, as though she might find her name written there. The girl stayed where she was, blanket pulled tighter, her eyes never leaving the woman's face. The wind swirled the dust between them, lifting it into a twisting column that caught the afternoon light. Somewhere in that spinning haze, something passed between the two, unspoken, unseen, but felt. And at the edge of the street, the man in the shadows shifted his stance, straightened, and kept watching. Nights in that town were meaner than the days. The wind carried the sharp scent of whiskey and sweat from the saloon, wrapping itself around the narrow alley, like a wet rag. There, between a wall of warped planks and the stacked crates that never moved, the girl curled under her blanket, knees drawn tight to her chest. The boards behind her wept with the slow drip of rainwater from the eaves. Rats knew the sound of her breathing and kept their distance only when she stirred. By morning, she would sift through the wooden bins at the back door of the saloon, fingers quick to snatch scraps before the dogs did. Bits of bread gone hard at the edges, a gnawed piece of potato, once even the heel of a pie someone hadn't wanted. She ate quick, the way someone does when they know things can be taken before they're swallowed. The woman had been trying to work since stepping off the stage. First, the hotel keeper, an older man with a belly pressing at his vest buttons, looked her over the way some folks do with horses, checking teeth, without bothering to ask a name. She offered to scrub floors, to haul water, to take the least desirable room and back. His answer had been a chuckle and a shake of his head, muttering something about damaged goods, as if she couldn't hear. At the dress shop, the seamstress never let her finish the offer. One glance, one look at the girl trailing behind, and she set her jaw and said she needed no help. Her voice was sweet as vinegar when she wished them luck finding someone else. The man saw them the first time as they walked past his corral, two figures moving slow, hugging the far edge of the road to avoid a buckboard coming through. The woman kept the girl tucked on the inside, her hand resting light on the girl's shoulder, ready to pull her close if the wagon veered. Dust clung to the folds of her skirt, and her eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead. She didn't notice him leaning against the fence post, his hat brim shadowing the steady way he watched her. The second time, it was the heat of mid-afternoon. The girl's steps dragged, her hair sticking to her cheek, but still the woman didn't pause to ask for help or offer a look that might invite it. She kept moving, the girl's small hand held firm, as though they might vanish if they slowed. The third time, the girl dropped something. A dented tin cup clattered in the dust, rolling just far enough to catch the man's boot. He bent, picked it up without hurry, and held it out. The girl stared at him, eyes flicking to the rifle slung across the saddle rail nearby, then to the calloused hand offering the cup. She took it without a word. He gave a short nod, turned, and walked away, his spurs clicking once against the packed dirt before silence swallowed the sound. That night in the alley, the woman found a small bundle resting on the crate beside her. The cloth was rough but clean, knotted tight around something warm. Inside was cornbread, the kind that crumbled at the edges and smelled faintly of molasses. No note, no mark of where it had come from. She looked once toward the street before tucking it under the blanket to share with the girl. Whispers moved faster than the wind in a place like that. Some said the woman had been turned away by her intended before she'd even set foot on the platform. Others claimed she'd never had one, that she'd made up the story to earn sympathy. Either way, the word respectable wasn't spoken near her anymore. The saloon owner, a man whose teeth showed only when he was about to say something cruel, offered her a position in his upstairs rooms. He called it work, but the way his eyes slid over her dress left no doubt what he meant. Her refusal was quiet, but it was enough to harden his smile into something dangerous. Resentment settled on him like a second skin. Days grew colder. She and the girl were shadows against the street, slipping past doorways where conversation cut off when they approached. The girl's cough began as a tickle, small and dry, but worsened with each night spent under leaking roofs. When the storm came, it came fast, black clouds rolling over the ridge, wind snapping laundry lines until the cloth tore free. Rain slapped the earth hard, turning the road to a river of brown water. The alley became a trap, the runoff pooling ankle-deep, soaking the girl's blanket until it clung heavy against her thin shoulders. She coughed, doubled over, a sound that seemed too big for her frame. A shadow filled the mouth of the alley. The man stood there, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, coat collar turned up. His boots made no splash as he stepped forward. Without a word, he shrugged off the coat and held it out. "Come on," he said, his voice low, almost lost under the roar of the storm. The woman hesitated only a second before wrapping the coat around the girl, lifting her into her arms. The fabric hung heavy but warm, smelling faintly of horses and wood smoke. He turned and led them out, the mud pulling at their steps. Lightning lit the road ahead in brief white flashes, each one showing the cabin on the edge of town a little closer. The rain drummed against the roof as they reached the porch, and he opened the door, without looking back, to see if they followed. Inside, the air was still and dry, the scent of pine logs lingering from the last fire. The door closed on the storm, leaving only the sound of the girl's cough softening as the warmth began to seep in. The cabin smelled faintly of pine and the faint metallic tang of the stove. Inside, space was claimed by necessity, not comfort. A narrow bed against one wall, a single table scrubbed smooth from years of use, tools arranged in neat lines like soldiers on parade. The fire in the small iron stove murmured low, sending ribbons of heat into the room. He ladled coffee into tin mugs, the steam curling in the lamplight, and set down a pan of beans that still hissed faintly. The girl's eyes widened at the sight, her hands already curling around the warmth of the mug before she dared a sip. She ate as if unsure it would last, each bite a small miracle. The woman ate more slowly, her gaze moving over the room in measured passes. It lingered on the rifle mounted above the hearth, polished but clearly well used, and on the framed tintype tucked onto a shelf. A younger woman with a calm smile. A small boy pressed her aside. Her fingers tightened around her mug, but she asked nothing. He moved with the quiet economy of someone who wasted neither motion nor word. When he folded the blankets after they'd eaten, the edges aligned with a soldier's precision. Wood was stacked in tight, orderly rows, each piece cut to match the others. It was a kind of discipline that didn't need explaining. A few days later, a neighbor came by with a side of salted pork, lingering just long enough to glance between the man and the woman before muttering, "Never thought I'd see the day the quickest draw in the territory kept company under his own roof again." The woman said nothing, but her eyes caught the flicker of something in his, an old habit surfacing before it was pushed down. Life inside the cabin found its own pace. One evening, she noticed the tear in his shirt sleeve and set about mending it without asking. He stood still while she worked, the brush of her knuckles against his arm drawing neither flinch nor comment, only a quiet kind of acknowledgement. In the afternoons, he gave the girl a small knife and a length of wood, showing her how to pare away the shavings until something resembling a bird began to emerge. She held it like a treasure, even when it was little more than the suggestion of wings. Laughter came rarely, and when it did, it was soft and unannounced, the kind that caught them off guard and left a faint warmth in its wake. But the town did not stay quiet. One day, as she passed the saloon on her way back from the well, the owner stepped into her path. His shadow cut across her dress, his voice low and sharp as he accused her of stealing the man, of taking something that wasn't hers to have. She met his stare without answering, then walked past. The weight of his gaze clung to her all the way home. That night, the cabin was pierced by the sound of shattering glass. A rock lay on the floor beside the table, a scrap of paper tied around it. She picked it up and read the scrawl, "Take her back where she came from." He took the note from her hand without a word, glanced once at the message, then dropped it into the stove. Flames licked up the edges, curling the paper into black ash. He set the rock on the table, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the fire. Something in his stillness felt heavier than anger, a decision settling in his bones. By the time the rumor reached her, it had already been repeated enough to wear smooth. The saloon owner claimed she owed him for food, for whiskey she'd never touched, for a room she'd never stepped into. His voice carried just far enough when he told it. So the grocery clerk, the seamstress, the barkeep all heard. He said she'd better pay or pack. And in a town like this, no one bothered to ask her side. She stayed inside that day, mending one of the man's shirts by the window, her needle trembling just enough to knot the thread. The girl sat near the stove, tracing patterns in the dust on the floor with her finger. By nightfall, the story had taken root. She was a thief, a liar, someone who would bleed the man dry if he wasn't careful. The next day, the sun was hot and clean in the sky, a kind of noon light that left no shadows to hide in. The saloon's door swung open and shut in the breeze, the sound of glasses clinking inside. A few regulars leaned against the posts out front, trading idle talk until they saw him coming. He didn't hurry. His boots pressed deep into the dust with each step, his hat pulled low, but not enough to hide the set of his jaw. Inside, the saloon smelled of stale beer and smoke. The owner stood behind the bar, wiping a glass that didn't need it, a smirk curling the edge of his mouth as he looked up. The man reached into his coat and set a small leather pouch on the bar. It landed heavy, the thud of coins making the room fall quiet. "Debt's settled," he said, his voice carrying just enough to reach the farthest corner. "She stays." The saloon owner's smirk faltered. He glanced toward the men in the corner, but none met his eyes. No one said a word. The man's stance made talk unnecessary, solid as the mountains to the west, the weight of his past hanging in the air like the smell of gunpowder. He turned without another glance and left the pouch where it sat. The door swung shut behind him, the sound cutting through the silence like the last note of a psalm. Weeks passed, and the cabin became something else. She planted a row of beans by the fence. The girl's cough eased, her cheeks filling out, her laughter starting to come without being coaxed. Some nights, the man would bring in a bundle of kindling and find them bent together over the table, stitching patches into a quilt of mismatched cloth. One morning, the sky was pale and thin, the kind of light that made the frost on the grass glitter. He saddled the horse without saying much, only telling the girl to bring her coat. She climbed up in front, her small hands gripping the horn. The woman mounted behind him, her skirt gathered close against the chill. They rode into town without announcement. The street was quiet but not empty. Faces appeared in the windows, a few men leaning on railings to watch. He dismounted in front of the church and helped the girl down, his hand steady on her shoulder. Inside, the air was cooler, still carrying the scent of last Sunday's candles. The pastor looked up from a worn Bible, surprise flickering in his eyes before he straightened. The man asked for a paper. No speech, no preamble, just a request and the sound of a pen scratching against the wood of the desk. He signed his name first, each letter deliberate. Then he slid the paper to her. She hesitated only a moment before setting her name beside his. There was no ring, no vows, no audience beyond the pastor and the girl, who leaned against the pew, watching as if the whole thing were a secret just for them. When they stepped back into the street, the watching faces didn't speak. The sound of the horse's tack was louder than the wind. Halfway down the road, the girl reached out, her small fingers curling around his hand. He looked down, then forward again, his grip gentle but firm. Back at the cabin, the sun was sliding low, throwing gold over the hills. He went to the doorway, took a small knife from his pocket, and began to carve into the wood of the frame. The strokes were careful, deep enough to last, each line shaping a name that was hers now as much as his. The girl's laughter drifted from inside, soft and unguarded, carried on the wind that smelled faintly of pine smoke and earth. He stood back, running a thumb over the carved letters, then stepped inside, closing the door against the falling night. Outside, the dust settled, and the hum of the stove took up the quiet work of filling the cabin with warmth.